And again, for those that are not regulars in the class, we're not really doing a verse-by-verse study. I'm not breaking this down. We're kind of doing it in blocks. And so I'll read a section, and then we can just generally talk about it. When they had finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street in a great city, which mystically called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Now I'm going to ask you a question real quick. Does any of this smack of anything that's literal? And the answer is no. There's nothing about this that's literal. It is figurative language. It is symbolic language. Those from the peoples and the tribes and the tongues and the nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. And so the testimony comes forth, and it's borne by these two witnesses. And what ultimately happens to the witnesses? They're killed. What happened to John and Jesus? Why were they killed? Both of them. Why? Because of their testimony. Because people didn't like what they said. What happened with people of the world when they were killed? Was there great mourning over the land when John died? Was there great mourning over the land when Jesus died? No. They celebrated. And that is exactly what's being described here. Once the testimony is done, these witnesses are going to die. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. How did they torment them? Right, by making them aware of sin. Now, this is an important thing for us to understand. If when John stood before Herod and he said, "You have no right to be married to this woman. She belongs to your brother Philip." And that tormented him to the point that he ordered for John's head to be removed. And if Jesus' teaching drove the scribes and the Pharisees to hate him so much that they demanded a murderer and a thief to be released, and a man whom the Roman authorities said, "I can find no fault in him. He's done nothing worthy of death. Let me let him go to you." They said, "Absolutely not. We don't want you to let him go. You let Barabbas go, this guy that we know murdered people. You let him go, and you put Jesus on the cross." If that's the way their testimony was reacted to by the people of the world, if we speak the testimony of God, how are people in the kingdom of this world going to react to it? In a similar way. Luckily, as it stands currently, the authorities who have the power are not actively seeking to destroy us now. Which means what? We don't have to worry right now of actually losing our life. For the most part. Not completely true, but for the most part. And there are places and pockets in the world where certainly that's a real threat from the people who have the authority and power to move or act on it, or because the people in authority and power don't stop that from being moved or acted on. But generally speaking, for ourselves, we can say that we are blessed and that we don't have to actually fear that our lives are going to be taken from us, but there are things that can happen to us. We ought not be surprised when people don't like what we say, and when there are, from time to time, actual, real-life, temporal consequences for that. It may be that you don't get a job. It may be that you don't get a promotion. It may be that you get marginalized by people that were once your friends. It may be that people start speaking evil against you and using every little thing that they can find as a wedge to argue that you're a hypocrite. It may be that they, and this is the popular thing currently to happen, it may be that they seek to socially cancel you and stop your ability to speak by poisoning the well of public opinion against you. There's lots of things that can happen, none of which are pleasant. They're short of death, but none of them are pleasant. In fact, someone might argue, I'm not going to argue this, but someone might argue that in some ways that kind of persecution is worse than death. Because what happens for the faithful when they die? They have the paradise that the Lord told the thief on the cross he was going to experience. What happens for those of us that remain in the world and continue to be persecuted? This undaunting struggle. And that is what it is for us, a mental struggle. Because when it happens day after day after day, week after week after week, year after year after year, what happens to our faith? We get weary. And just like Elijah, who was constantly running from Ahab and Bathsheba, we just want it to be over. And we sat down and we quit working. And when that happens, we've lost sight of the battle and the struggle. And that is the point of this book. That is the entire point of this book. That while they're enduring these things, that they shouldn't lose sight of the fact that who is ultimately in control? Who is really fighting the war? God. Gideon didn't need 30,000 men. Why was Gideon able to defeat a superior force with only 300 men? You remember that story from the Old Testament, right? He had all these people. God said, no, don't go to war with those people. If you go to war with those people, you're going to think you just won. And I don't want you to think that you've done this thing. And so tell anybody who wants to go home to go home. And a bunch of them left. And he went, nah, that's still not enough. And he works it down. And finally he says, all right, let them get a drink. And he said, some of them are going to lap the water like a dog. And some of them are going to put their hand to their mouth and drink it. Distinguish between those two and take this group. And it turned out that 300 people were all that were left. And Gideon went into battle with 300 men, and what happened? The enemy was defeated. Because of the great war skills of the 300 men that fought with Gideon? No. And that was the whole point. The battle belongs to the Lord. It's God's fight. That's the point of this book as well. It's been bad since the testimony was first proclaimed. It's been bad since the first witnesses came along. The first witness died. The second witness died. What happened to the 12 that came after them? They died. One of them got to live to be an old man, but did he get to live in his own house and his own land and around his own family? No, he died marginalized and placed on an island. Who am I talking about? John, the guy who's writing this. He's not at home. He's on Patmos as a prisoner. All of them suffered. All of those who would come behind them will suffer. The question is, how do we respond to that? And this, the point of this entire book. Because what happened after the 3.5 days? The breath of life from God came into them. What happens to those who die in the Lord? raised. Jesus was raised. He's the first fruits. All of those who die in the Lord are going to be raised like he was raised. They're going to be changed to be like him. They're going to be where he is. That is part of the theme of the Gospel of John, is it not? John 14, I go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. For 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came to them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were beholding them. They had heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here," and they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies beheld them. Where did at least Jesus go? We had witnesses to this fact, by the way. They beheld him ascend into heaven. In that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. These things moved the earth figuratively. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. The seventh angel sounded. So we're back to the 7 angels of the 7 seals sounding forth. The 7th angel sounded. There arose a loud voice in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever." I think this is even pretty straightforward symbolism. What is the kingdom of Christ? The church. When he ascended into heaven and sat down on the right hand of God, what did he sit upon? His throne. Has his reign begun? Yes. When will it end? It will not end. That's been the prophecy from the very beginning. Of his kingdom there will be no end. Now, keep in mind, is it a material kingdom? No. That's why it can exist without end. For that very reason. And so when it talks about him reigning forever and ever over this kingdom, this is not a material kingdom. Does it have a material presence? Yes. Does that mean it's material? No. What is its material presence, by the way? Us. Those who are his subjects, who walk after him, who receive him as Lord, who are added to his assembly, the church. 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshiped God. That's a reference to something that's earlier in the book, when there's a description of the throne room in heaven. When these things took place, when the kingdom was established, there was the worshiping of God in all places, saying, "We give thanks, O Lord God Almighty, who art and who was, because thou hast taken thy great power and hast begun to reign." When will Jesus reign? He is reigning. These things must shortly come to pass. People who interpret this book to place the reign of Jesus sometime in the distant future are missing the point. He has begun to reign. These things have happened. He has borne witness. He has died. He has been raised. He has begun to reign. The nations were enraged, and thy wrath came, and the time came for the dead to be judged, and the time came for their rewards, and thy bondservants, the prophets, to do the saints and those who fear thy name, the small and the great, to destroy those who destroy the earth. And the temple of God, which is in heaven, was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple, and there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, an earthquake from the great hailstorm. And again, none of that's new imagery. It's been several times in the book of Revelation already. It comes multiple times throughout the scriptures. It almost always represents the presence of God and the handing down of his law. The appearance of the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant. here. Where is the Ark of the Covenant, by the way? I'll give you a hint. It's not in the London Museum. It's in a big warehouse in Washington where the Army is storing it ever since Indiana Jones found it. And the people that have seen that movie know what I'm talking about, and they're laughing. We don't know where it is. Because he's not talking about the literal ark. He's talking about what the ark represents. What did the ark represent? Two things. The ark represented two things. What was inside the ark? Okay, the Ten Commandments, the law of God, the covenant, Aaron's stick, which was part of that process as well, and a pot of manna, which was the providence of God that was at play throughout that process. So the contents, the Ark of the Covenant, there's a reason why it's called the Ark of the Covenant, because it was the vessel that carried the covenant. And then on top of it was the mercy seat. And what happened at the mercy seat? That's where they interacted with God. Now there's a new order. Christ is on the throne. By the way, where was the ark kept? Anybody remember? In the temple in the Holy of Holies, behind the veil. When Jesus died, what happened to the veil? It split open from top to bottom, and that symbolizes the fact that man has access through Christ to God. We don't have this priesthood of the earth anymore to deal with. We have a different priesthood. We are priests under our high priest Christ, and we have access to God through him. And so this represents or is symbolic of all of those things. Its presence is where? Where's the covenant of God? Where is the access to God today? Through Christ, and specifically through his kingdom, which is the church. That's all that this is saying. This is reminding us as we face and deal with all the ordeals of life, and there are going to be a bunch of them, and it's going to be hard, and I don't know how long we're going to live. 70 years if due to strength 80. Some of us are lucky and go 90 or 100. Maybe that's not lucky. Maybe some of us are unlucky and go 90 or 100. I don't know how to characterize that. But the days of our lives are what? Toil and struggle and difficulty and being separated from the realization of these things, only holding these things where? In hope. And so we have all that, and we have this provided to us to remind us that it's present despite the fact that we can't see it. That he's present despite the fact that we can't see him. That his covenant is here. Where does his kingdom exist? In our hearts. Again, let's go all the way back to Jesus before Pilate, before he was crucified. Are you a king? You've said correctly, I'm a king. I've come to testify to the truth. But my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. What did he say about his kingdom? Behold, it is in your midst. It is within men. What we have to remember as we go day after day after day through the struggles and the trials of life, through the war that we are engaged in, is that we are there with him, and that the battle belongs to him. If we think we're fighting on our own, what are we going to do? We're going to faint. That's how it always works in nature. Imagine two beasts fighting over territory, fighting over a mate, fighting over food, whatever you want them to fight over. When one realizes that the other is bigger and stronger and they can't win, what does it do? It surrenders. That's what we'll do if we think we're fighting this battle on our own. So we are being reminded of what God is doing and what is happening right now. The temple's established. Heaven is open. The ark is there. God's presence and power are before us. A great sign appeared in heaven. In case you've forgotten that this is a book of signs and symbols. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, you can look at a bunch of different commentaries and talk about and get their insights as to what this means. I don't know that it means anything more than the glory, the fact that she's robed and her feet are on the moon. But because we're studying Genesis right now, this actually jumped into my head when I read this. What is the moon? Well, the moon has dominion over the night, over the darkness. And the sun has dominion over the day. So we're clothed with that which has dominion over the light, and we're standing atop. What's that language? What's that symbolically usually mean if you're standing on something? You've conquered it. We probably, at least some of us, when we were kids, played King of the Mountain or King of the Hill or whatever. The whole point of that game is to do what? Get to the top of the hill and stand on top of it. And as long as nobody can knock you off, you're the king of the hill. What's being described here is this woman who has conquered darkness and is clothed in light. On her head is a crown of 12 stars. She was with child. She cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. Another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. On his heads were 7 diadems, and his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them from the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. And he gave birth to a son. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. The length of time is symbolic, just as everything else is symbolic here. Most commonly, people see this as reflective of the struggle between who? Obviously, it's the devil. He's pretty clearly identified, right? And in fact, he's going to be directly identified a little bit later in the book. The great serpent as being the devil. Question is who the woman is and who the child is. A lot of people assume the child is Jesus, and it does, in fact, picture the struggle that took place between Jesus and the devil. The devil sought to devour him, but who won that battle? He won. And where did he go? He was caught up to God and to his throne. And so I think it clearly can be applied that way. I have no problem with that. A lot of people see the woman as being the church. That creates problems because the church doesn't give birth to Jesus. Jesus gives birth to the church. So if the woman is the church, then the child is not Jesus. If the woman is the church, then the child is all those who are born through the work of the church. We are born again to a new and living hope. Like newborn babes, we're to long for the pure milk of the gospel. Again, the imagery works in this circumstance as well, because if the man-child stands for all those who are produced by the church, what happens to us? We struggle with Satan, we die, we're going to be raised. And so that's why Christ is set forth as an example and as the first fruits of the process. And that's why it works actually for both pictures. I don't know what the best way to apply it is, but I find a lot of comfort in knowing that despite the fact that I have this huge dragon who is warring with me, that ultimately what happens? I win. Even if I die, I win. See, killing me doesn't defeat me. For those of you that are looking for religious imagery in Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi represents that. Killing him didn't defeat him. In fact, killing him only did what? Made him better, stronger, more influential. That Christology appears in a lot of literature as a result of what we read in the scriptures. And this is the same thing that's going on here. Is there a war? Yes. Our struggle is against the spiritual forces of wickedness, and we fight that battle every day. We put on the armor of God in order to prevail. And ultimately, we win not apart from death, but through death. It's appointed unto man once to die. But we're going to find out in this very book that we don't have to die what? The second death. We have to die the first one, but we don't have to die the second one. And so I think that it is intended to empower us with hope. And then if in fact the woman is the church, then the woman flees, or is she at a place prepared by God so that she might be nourished for a time? The struggle is real, but God does what? He providentially cares for his people. He nourishes them. He provides for them. He gives them a place. Despite the fact that there's a war going on, despite the fact that there's a serious adversary, despite the fact that there are casualties, there is a place of respite, there is a place of rest where we are nourished and cared for through the providence and care of God. Is that the second bell or the first one? I have to stop. I'm getting better though. We will pick up in, I guess, around verse, 7, Lord willing.